Hey, welcome back to the Resolute Man Show. I've got my good friend Dave Durand here, leadership experts from Leading Giants. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you, Isaac.
Yeah, yeah. You know what's interesting? When I was a new father, I read one of your books, Perpetual Motivation. And I really appreciate that. And you talk in that book about spinning all the plates and not dropping them and the capacity to do more. And I remember thinking, this is part of your intro, by the way. This guy's got 6 children. How in the world does he do that while running such a successful business? So, anyways.
Well, you went on to do that even better. So we all know that you are a quick study. The only reason I was a little ahead was just because I had kids earlier. But what you've done with your family is just awesome.
Oh, thanks, brother. Thanks. Well, it's so good to have you here. Today, we're going to be having some lively discussions around some different topics. So I'm so excited to do that. Dave, first of all, I just played your promo video to my children on your YouTube channel, and they're like, Dad, that guy's cool.
Well, just because I've got a great staff back here, Nico makes me look cooler than I actually am. I'm really not that cool.
Well, I think you are. I mean, your hair's looking even better, I think, these days.
Yeah, it is. It's I always tell, there's 2 things that people don't tell you when you go bald. One is it's very, very, very cold, and people really like to rub your head.
Oh,
It's like your magic 8-ball or something to them.
yeah. Well, you know how to handle them if you really need to, right?
I do. Thankfully.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm so glad to have you here. You're doing something now, which, I mean, I've seen you doing aspects of this the entire time I've known you, which is equipping, training leaders, helping people in business, running businesses, speaking on leadership, speaking on motivation, speaking on skills, but always tempering it with biblical truth. And I so appreciate that you always stay on the line. And in your promo video, you talk about, success without losing your soul. And I think we need more of that today. I think there are a lot of people, it's very obvious, that are at a success mindset at whatever it takes or whatever it costs. And there are real costs when you approach it that way. And I just appreciate that you haven't. So I think there will be some great insights for people here. But before we dive in, what's your take on that?
I think that the world has so many things inverted. Kind of a parallel to of that would be, a lot of young men aren't getting married. They're waiting. They have a little dog that they think is going to fulfill all their needs, and it's just not true. And by the way, dogs should walk. Don't put them in a stroller. And if you spend too much money on their clothing, I think you've totally lost touch. Let me just say that. But the whole idea though is that when these young guys want to wait, one of the reasons they want to wait is they say, well, I'm going to build my physique, I'm going to build my finances, I'm going to build my business, and then I'm going to do that. The fact of the matter is, if you want to be rich, get married and have kids, because they're the wealthiest people in the United States. I made a joke the other day. I was giving a speech at a university, and I said, even if you don't like men or women and you don't like kids, but you want money, get married, find somebody, have kids, you'll be richer. And I, of course, don't mean that. And you do it for all the good and real reasons. But the point would be that even that sort of thing is inverted. Like, people will give you advice that runs against the truth all the time. Likewise, the whole idea that there would be competition between being a Christian and being successful in business it's incredibly false. I mean, there's a Christian advantage. Nobody's ever said, you know what I loved about working there? They were dishonest. They were unfair. They couldn't stay motivated. They didn't have any self-control. All of those things ultimately come from being a virtuous person. And then ultimately speaking, the virtues that we have that are natural, the cardinal virtues, are amplified by our faith. So for me, and I think it was Chesterton or he said something like, even if I wasn't a Christian, I would want my doctor, my lawyer, my boss, and my neighbor to be one.
Yeah, and I think it's right on. There's a lot of pressure out there, the cancel culture and so forth. It depends on where people are, too, if they're in the corporate America, different pressures on them. But in the end of the day, sometimes we even need to reorientate our lives. If there's pressures on us and we can't fully be who we are, of course in an appropriate nature, but then someone might want to think, well, how do I need to reorientate my life so that I can freely be who I am and stand firm in my faith and so forth? because you're right. I mean, I've seen a huge advantage in my entrepreneurial life, and one of the reasons you'll agree with this is that we have the Holy Spirit. I mean, the power of God. So there's man's wisdom, right? We can operate in our wisdom. We can go down the road, but then we have this really an awesome luxury that everybody could have, which is the Holy Spirit prompting us and giving us wisdom. And then we also have the Bible that has infinite wisdom. I was just reading with my kids this morning how the Bible cuts through bone and marrow. And it's using this analogy of warfare, right, from the old days of swords and so forth. But the spiritual book, the Bible, is alive. And how is it alive? So I discussed that with my children this morning. So there's so much wisdom there. And in a world where so many people are espousing so-called wisdom, nothing compares. Nothing compares to biblical wisdom and having the Holy Spirit in you. If you're in business and you're an entrepreneur and you're yielded to that, you do have an advantage, to your point.
Oh, you do. Of course, the Bible tells us that the Holy Spirit provides us gifts, including wisdom, understanding, fortitude, counsel. All of these things, they sound like a self-help seminar. And it also says that anyone who asks can receive this. Of course, this is contingent upon building natural virtue so that grace lands on that natural virtue. Our participation in that, is essential, right? And I think one of the funny things about that, too, is that, so often you have people that, they go down the hall to, Bob's office and to Judy's office, and they're looking up this expert on LinkedIn and they're asking them a question. And metaphorically speaking, here you have the Holy Spirit in the office right next door to you, who created the entire world, who, if God ceased to think of you, you wouldn't even exist anymore. Okay, so every single perfect amount of knowledge that could possibly exist is there. And we walk past God to see Bob? Are you kidding me? I mean, I think we should see Bob too, no doubt about it, because God works through Bob sometimes. But we can't just walk past God's office without stopping in and having a little dialogue there.
Yeah, well said. So well said. One of the things, you've had some dark hours in your life. And of course, we don't need to go into all the details, but I think that a lot of people relate to this. I noticed you mentioned this in one of the videos I was watching, and overcoming your darkest hours. I know that you kind of, one of the interesting things, this probably isn't your darkest hour, but you were fired by a friend. I think we were, by the way, fired by the same friend, ironically.
Yeah.
In one way or
another. Yeah, that is pretty ironic. And yet we still call him a friend.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. That's right. So I can relate to you there. But what does it look like to walk through your darkest hours in life and do that well?
I have gone through dark hours, and they've been difficult. And I personally don't really spend a lot of time talking about them, other than knowing that others are going through difficult times. So whether you're going through a divorce, you're going through a loss of life, somebody that's important to you, whether you're fighting an illness, whatever it happens to be, there's somebody else out there who's gone through an hour that has been that dark. The way that I look back on these things is, first of all, God has a plan that we don't understand. His ways are not ours. We don't understand things at the level that he understands. And just like a young child does not like to be disciplined and doesn't like to have things restrained from that child, but everything that we do for that child is for their benefit, we don't realize. And as a parent, we'll say that this is for your own good. And then God allows something to happen in our lives that, ultimately speaking, he writes straight with a crooked line for our own benefit, and we sit there and argue against it. Ultimately, these things, all I realized were gifts that I would never, ever, ever ask for again, but were something in some strange way I wouldn't return, because God did something interesting with it in life. So for me, it's abandonment to divine providence is basically it. It is to say, Jesus, I trust in you. I trust in you. I trust in you. And, no matter what happens here, just keep me on the right path. Because when we go through trauma, we can either, lean over to a bottle. We can, binge watch Netflix until we become entirely useless. We can tune out our families, and we can't do that. Ultimately speaking, we have to pray for the grace and the strength to restore things in a way that if somebody met you 5 years later, they can't believe the joy that you have. And what that does for people around beside yourself is absolutely amazing. And so I just want to tell anybody that if you're going through a difficult time, somebody else has probably gone through a time like that, or maybe even worse. And while if you have a headache, Isaac, and I have a headache, and we ask whose the worst headache is, it's yours and it's mine, because I have mine and you have yours. So, trying to compare somebody else's suffering as a way to make somebody else's suffering better, to say, well, somebody else has it worse, that's not very effective. The effective thing is to know that they have gone through it and they made it. And the tools that they have to get through that are not different from the ones that you can use to get through that too, I think is the biggest thing to remember.
And how do you make decisions? I mean, we're talking, there might be people, very successful people listening, but on the outside they're successful, but things are crumbling on the inside, or they have very devastating financial things or family issues going on. How do you stay the course and make sure you're taking care of your jurisdictions well then when you're in that darkest hour?
Well, this is a great question, because, at the end of the day, our success is a culmination of the impact of the good decisions we've made over the impact of the bad decisions we made. And that's not by quantity, it's by impact, which is why a lot of people make many, many, many good decisions and one big bad decision and everything falls apart. But we often have to realize that there are many different parts to our lives, and that each one of these is related or connected. So, frankly, you're going to be more influential. And if you want to start a business, you want to be more influential if you're in better shape. That's actually true. There's something about a person who takes care of themselves that somebody says, okay, they have discipline. This is all unconscious, by the way. They have discipline. Okay. They look like they could provide or protect something. So I'm drawn to them as opposed to repelled. And these things happen at an unconscious level. Oh, you know what? We've been talking and it's a financial discussion and, you're not getting anywhere. And then all of a sudden you drop down that, oh, you've got this much money and you've invested in this. All of a sudden you have a super high credential. Why? Your influence goes up because you managed your money. Even mobsters and politicians fake that they have good families. Why? Because what does it mean to have a good family? You're lovable, you love, you sacrifice, others sacrifice, and you can keep something together. So all of these other parts of our lives, they relate to certain things, which means that if we make a decision that compromises another part of our life, we're making a bad decision on that particular topic. And then I always teach people, listen, prudence is the key to decision making. It's the cardinal virtue. The cardinal virtue is, the word cardinal is a Latin term. It just means hinge. So it's not even a religious term. Aristotle talked about these as the natural virtues that all men have access to. And the first one, prudence, is the gateway to every other virtue that exists, because it's the mastery of decision making. And you can't have justice without a prudence. You can't have fortitude without prudence. You can't have temperance without prudence. And prudence, or the mastery of decision making, requires three things. Desire what is good, first step. You can't have a good relationship if you don't desire what is good. You can't have good finances if you don't desire what is good. You can't have a good business, anything, if you don't desire what is good. Second, know what's real. And this is where people get tripped up. Their emotions and their ego gets in the way. So they might desire what is good, but they can't face reality. Once you face the reality, though, you have to make a judgment, and then you need to act on it. So you need to desire what is good, know what is real, and then act on what is good. And if we do that basic little simple formula for great decision making, it's amazing what happens after that.
That's so good. So good. I mean, yeah, it really does come down to our decisions. And most decisions made in fear are bad decisions. And so if people are not tapped into real wisdom, as you're talking about here, then they could just fall to what is kind of like fake wisdom. I think, what comes to my mind too, I think we should talk about is getting other people's opinions. Because I've always said that you should take very, very few opinions, and you have to take the right opinions, but do take those right opinions. But how can you take the right opinions from people if you have not surrounded yourself with people who have real wisdom, that aren't just going to take their own experiences and throw them at you, but instead have a real valid source of wisdom, maybe a godly wisdom, right? And so I think that's really important. I see so often people, they get input from people that validates how they feel, and how they feel is inferior to what's probably best to do. And so I think it's really important, people listening, that we are really careful in where we get wisdom from, the advice we get from people, I'm not saying be a Lone Ranger. Lone Rangers usually die in the desert. But I am saying that you do need to build your council. Another way to say it. It's important to build a council around you of people you implicitly trust and you know are going to give you that good wisdom. What are your thoughts about that?
Oh, yeah, 100%. It is important to know where the resources come from. And I think there's two things that we can ask for in input from others. That very small group of wise counsel, who are also detached, by the way. I think that the number of people that we ask for factual feedback and critical analysis can be much more vast. What do you objectively know? You, for example, have started 15 businesses. This is the business model that I have. What would you say in assessment to that? That's a very different thing than just a general opinion from somebody. And so that small group of people you want opinions on, and those are things, for example, like, do you think this makes sense for me in life right now? That's very different than, is this a good business model? And those opinions you want from that small group of people who have a bit of a detachment, meaning that they're not there to just support you, but they're there to say, Isaac, I don't think that works for you. And so that kind of blend of asking for opinion and asking for objective, concrete input on something is really a smart take.
It's so true. I mean, I remember one of my darkest hours. I had a startup company that was doing a couple $1 million, but wasn't enough. We couldn't turn the corner. And I had a couple brothers, pull me aside that I did really, really trust, biblically minded people. And they just said, Isaac, I think you should stop. And here's why. You should close the doors on that thing. I mean, we had 43 employees and all the big office space. It was a lot of challenges, right? And your pride's on the line, right? And pride can get in the way.
Right.
And, we were written up in the local newspapers as a fast-growing company, all these things. And so, but I remember, okay, but what is the sacrifice? Even if you're not intending to sacrifice because it's pulling you so far, you have to make payroll and it's not set up quite right. It didn't work out the way it was supposed to. And I remember listening to these gentlemen and just like, you're right. I needed that. I needed that outside counsel, especially entrepreneurs that are far down the road and they've invested so much. And it's not always to close it. Sometimes it's to change it, it's to pivot. Sometimes it's to grow it. But what is that path? And we need, because we all have blind spots. And the more invested we are in something, the more those blind spots are sometimes larger and harder. The more our pride and maybe ego grows, that we might have some blind spots. So anyways, that's a time in my history, and I ended up closing it down. And it ended up being the very best thing I could have done for everybody involved. Maybe not short term, but long term. And I think that's so important, is to know when to stop, when to go, when to push harder, and when to let go. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I say there's a few different things that I think are really bad advice that people give. There's funny little things that are more benign, like, God gave you 2 ears and one mouth, listen twice as much as you talk, which is silly, because if you ever talk to somebody in a one-on-one conversation that tells you that you need to do that, they're obviously planning on not doing it themselves because the math doesn't work out, frankly speaking. Okay. We should talk as long as it takes to be understood, and we should listen as long as it takes to understand. That should be the formula, not some sort of virtue signaling aspect that doesn't make any sense. I mean, if I'm teaching a class, I'm going to speak 95% of the time. If I'm listening in the class, I'm going to listen 95% of the time. It's just going to work out that way, and that's what is meant to be. So there's silly things like that. Another one is you can be anything you want to be. This is ridiculous. Follow your passion. Also very, very bad advice. Yeah. And the last one, which is never quit. That is very bad advice. And you were wise to say, wait a second, I'm going to pack this thing up and I'm going to move into a different place. Yeah. I mean, if you talk to most entrepreneurs who had success, they quit something. Mm-hmm. And they started something else, and they packed what they took from that, and they learned something, they did something new. So I think that, people say these kind of bumper sticker things because they sound cool. I want to be the side guy that says no quit, because I sound like I've never quit anything, and everything I've tried to do works really well. And I listen twice as much as I speak as well, too. And you know what? I follow my passions. Come on, ridiculous. You know what you do? You bring your passion to where you work, and then you're going to find all your happiness. And if your passion is playing the guitar, you're going to be like, you've got like 1 in 200,000 odds that you'll actually make enough money to do that without being a waiter. So follow your passion, sure, but do it on the weekends in front of your family or a little small band. But if you really want to, do something great in life, find something you're good at and bring passion into it, and it's going to work. And that's why, Isaac, at the end of the day, while it was probably hard for you to do that, and I remember those days too for you, getting the counsel that you got from those guys, you were wise enough to listen, you were humble enough to make the change, and as a result of it, you didn't leave it all behind, and neither did they. They learned a lot from you, you learned a lot from it, and somehow, some way, that company is still alive, at least in the cells of the things that you're doing today.
Yeah, amen. Well, I'm very curious, shifting gears for a second. I know you were doing sales management in the distant past at a very high level, and then you decided to go and build something of your own. Obviously not your own. You built it with other people. You have a co-founder and so forth. But you know what I mean. And how does that process happen when you're in a structure, and maybe someone's in a structure of an employee, or maybe they're in a structure of they're independent, but they have structure around them already there. To go and just go clean slate, I've got this vision, I've got this gumption to go contribute to the world in this bigger way and create a contribution that just has massive impact. How does that, where's the gap? How does that happen? How did you have the confidence to do that? I think people would be interested.
Yeah, it's funny. Leading Giants is entirely built on that. And we have that as a caricature. That guy's name is Matt. He's 32. He's got 2 kids, a third on the way. He's done the math. He realizes that at his current income, there's not going to be enough to pay for college or to retire. And he's like, I'm stuck. I got to do something. So he goes on YouTube and he sees people with all these side hustles. And so they all tell him to be an influencer and sell something online. That's hilarious, by the way. Little craft business that people have developed where all they do is teach people how to sell something online, but nobody actually sells anything online other than advice on how to sell something online. But I realized, wait, there's this massive group of people out there who don't want to leave to be an influencer. They want to leave because, you know what? They could probably be a plumber and they could go from 1 truck to 20. And how do they do that? They're a photographer and they did a couple of weddings as a side hustle. Well, how can they go from doing 1 wedding in a weekend to scaling that out and doing 40 weddings in a weekend? They have another idea or a skill. They're building a software, but they just don't know how to take it to market. They don't know how to scale their ideas. And this is the gap that they need to be able to take, to go from, I've got my regular stable job, and now I've got to somehow bridge the gap, that scary gap of entering into the space of entrepreneurship and make it happen. What I would tell people is that it's not quite as risky as you think if you do it the right way. So, for example, I'm a pilot. And pilot training is fascinating. I love it because unlike a lot of other training, in pilot training, other things, the consequences, okay, you're learning to do a program here. If you don't get this right, the program's not going to work. In pilot training, is like, if you don't do this, ... you'll die. And you're like, okay, well, I should probably pay attention then. It's not, once you have the training down, though, you're not really in this constant level of threat because you have redundancies over and over and over again. If this happens, I'm going to do this. If that happens, I'm going to do this. And I'm going to go through so much training on this that I'm going to have a really cool, calm heart about it. And if I have an emergency, I'm just going to manage it. And it happens. It happens for pilots more than you would probably expect. So in entrepreneurship, it can be the same sort of thing where you say to yourself, okay, this is the amount of money that I need for the gap to make the change. So there's 2 things I need to know. 1, do I have a minimally viable product or minimally viable program that people like? If that exists and it's real, you can take it times 1,000. The biggest problem, though, and you know this, Isaac, I know you know this because you've interacted with people, so people get stuck in solopreneurship. Yeah. And I literally see my mission right now is to free people from the prison of solopreneurship and teach them how to be actual entrepreneurs. You can 3x to 10x your business with 1 employee, just 1 employee. But the reason people won't get that 1 employee is because you can't trust people out there. Good people are hard to find. Nobody can do it just like me. All lies. But they are lies bolstered by ego. So the way that you actually make that gap, if you really need to do it, is you need to humble yourself to see the reality of the circumstance and then do what other people have done. Because you and I have both watched people say it can't be done and it can't be done that way, while their competitors are literally doing it that way 100 times better than them.
Yeah.
Yet they make some sort of claim that they don't even really exist when they exist right in front of them. And so this is the ego, and we have to get past the ego to get to those levels.
Oh, I remember a time where I was innovating and I was in a structure independent, but there was other people doing the same thing around the country. And I just remember, going, wait a minute, I need to stop for a second. I need to humble myself. I just want to share this story because it has to do with what you're talking about. And I need to humble myself, and I need to learn from all the different kinds of businesses and business leaders that are doing things. So I was voraciously reading leadership and business books and the Jim Collins and these different things. And I remember going, whoa, this can be done better. There's people doing this. There's blueprints in these books I'm reading for how to do these things better. And I started making one change after another. I got my team together, 15 leaders, and we discussed it all day. I fed them all day, and we decided to make, actually more like 8 leaders, we decided to make about a dozen changes over a span of time, planned out. You don't make all those changes at once, but we made strategic changes, and some of those were at complete odds with the culture I was in, complete odds with the people that had power around me. And it was so interesting how just several years later, some of those things would be implemented as the mainstay. And it caused us to go from what we were doing, because I was so frustrated. If anybody's listening and you're frustrated with the level of success your business is having, you need to break the lid, and the lid starts with you, right? So I had to grow, I had to realize, and then I had to learn some new things and implement some new things, and then face the opposition, because there will always be opposition. And when that opposition comes, you will face it well if you've thought through it in great detail. If you have an absolute conviction about the direction backed up by evidence, then you're going to stay the course. And I stayed the course. And while it rubbed some people the wrong way, we went to what's never been done before in that setting. And I just think that it's so important that our ego is in check. I just want to reinforce what you said. It's so brilliant. It's so right on, because there's cultural ego too in organizations, where it's like resistance to certain changes because we've always done it this way. I remember this one time someone said, no, Isaac, we've already tried that. That is proven to not work. And I'm like, well, you have just decided because you think you've proved something that it can't work when the world is changing, when what is socially acceptable is changing. And no, we can't charge for that anymore. We need to actually give it for free in this process. And getting the resistance on those things is fascinating by looking at data. Now, I know you're a data-driven person. This brings up something I want to talk to you about. And data is good, but data also is sometimes wrong. What do you think about that?
Well, I think data can be wrong. There's no doubt about it. But if data is wrong, it's because your developers have programmed something the wrong way, or the person who's entering it is entering it in a misleading fashion. What I see more than anything, although I admit data can be wrong. There's a good point, by the way. So this isn't a but. It's a true. However, most of the problems that people have with data is that they manipulate it. I will never forget. This is a great example. I was on a building committee for a church, and there was a big, beautiful old church in the town. And the question was, do we tear this church down and build a new one, or do we leave it up and build a new one next to it and let it stay as kind of an icon, having stood for 100 years in the community? And the person who was the chairing the committee said, oh, we're definitely going to tear it down. And he was just all into tearing it down. And it wasn't his right, and it wasn't his church. And so I said, well, I think that we should probably ask people. So I'm on this committee, and he says this. He says, we got to tear it down, blah, blah, blah. Everybody wants to tear it down. We talked to everybody. They all want to tear it down. Okay, you didn't know you didn't. So I pressed him, and I said, let's do a poll. Let's do an actual survey. So we had an independent third-party survey, and it said 87% of the people wanted to keep the church up. We go to the committee meeting, and I am not kidding you. He looks at it and he goes, we got the data back. Clearly, everyone wants to tear the church down. And we're literally looking at each other like it's a Harvard business class where they say socialism is good. And you're going, nothing about that is true, but you're the professor and I paid him a lot of money, so maybe. It was unbelievable. I was like, I'm looking at this data. So it's basically he was going to try to ramrod this whole thing through with just like some sort of, you don't want to sell me death sticks, Jedi trick. It didn't work because the people, of course, said, no, that's not going to happen, and it stayed up. But people will manipulate data in a way that's fascinating. But if you don't have the data, then you can't actually use it. But I think that, see, this is another thing that happened. This actually has happened to me in one of my businesses where I start a lot of companies and I'll put somebody in the CEO. And they're all very smart, all very experienced. One of them, though, was so emotionally tied to the outcomes that he wanted that there was data that was dirty. And it wasn't anybody's fault. It just happened to come in not clean. And he never questioned it. And I said, that data doesn't match this data, which doesn't match this data, which I think is going to lead to that outcome. Oh, no, it's great. It's great. It's great. Okay. And then a few months later, it turned out that it really wasn't great. And it's the way you look at that data, the way you test the data. Can you cut it in 4 different ways? Like, somebody's going to come to me and they're going to say, I'm going to grow my division, or I'm going to grow this sub company within the organization. And we're going to grow by 35% this year or 50% this year. I would say, why? And when they tell me a reason why, I say, well, give me another reason why. Now I want you to cut it this way. I mean, when you have private equity companies that come in to buy your business, they will slice it in 15 different ways. Sure, you could get the revenue from here, but have you thought about the revenue from here? And what happens if the revenue comes in this direction or in these different ways? And when you learn to slice the data in so many different ways that you test it against each other, then you start to really do good things with it.
I love that. Thanks for sharing. I mean, that's really good. Not just taking it at face value, but slicing in different directions and really testing it, making sure it's clean. And interesting, the motivations, right? The feelings and motivations. If we are motivated in a direction without even realizing it, we can grab just the data that validates our point of view, which is what I heard from you. So I think that is dangerous because it can lead us down a road of lack of success, or just not the level of success that the organization could have if it was looking at things correctly. There is this conditioned thinking concept that happens too, that validates bad data or just looks at it wrong because we're emotional about it, right? We have conditioned thinking about our existence. I think we all do sometimes, and it's important. And one of the things I do is I spend, time just really trying to get away from my experience and think clearly and to be productive in my thinking. There's this one book that calls it productive thinking versus reproductive thinking. It's a book called Think Better, actually. And it's interesting because you have Steve Jobs made the iPhone. Well, everybody else at the moment was like, wait, it doesn't have buttons. Everybody wants buttons. BlackBerry's like, no, we got to keep our buttons. And, Steve Jobs was like, well, I'm going to give people what they don't even know they want, because I see that, right? And so if you were just to improve the BlackBerry that had buttons, then you would just make better buttons. But that's just repeated thinking. That's just thinking the same. But if you have productive thinking, as this book talks about, it's thinking anew. It's literally escaping your conditioned thinking long enough so you can think new thoughts outside of your experience, outside of current realities, to where you have real innovation, you have real thoughts, and then you have an iPhone and everybody copies it thereafter. So I think that it's important in business, it's important leading your family, it's important whatever we're doing, that we stop sometimes and we go, okay, where have I been conditioned and allowed myself to become conditioned to agree upon this when maybe this is available to me, but I'm trapped by this.
You and I have a common history where I remember, so I would go into these particular meetings. This was before I owned a company, but I was influential in the organization, and I was a little bit more of an innovative mind. I always had a different look at things that we could grow. And so enough of us pressed the owners of the business, and they would say, okay, you know what, we're going to take 3 days and we're just going to have brainstorms on how we're going to grow the business. And I was like, oh, this is going to be amazing. I can't wait. And to use an example, because this is not the company, and to show respect, I'll keep it more confidential. But It was like saying, we are in the pen business and we want to expand our company, and we sell pens directly to banks and banks alone for $1 each. And you go in there and you say, hey, I have an idea. Why don't we sell them to more than banks? Why don't we sell them to any company? No. We're here to grow the business and innovate. by selling $1 pens only to banks. You're sitting there going, we have 99% of the $1 bank pen market. You can't. And so you have this false idea that you're going to be able to go in and brainstorm, and every single idea that wasn't exactly running the company exactly the way it always ran it was thrown away. I couldn't take it anymore. I literally couldn't take it anymore. That's why I was fired by a friend, because I literally couldn't take it anymore. And now that I have my own businesses, it's amazing. We have people who want to innovate. We come into a room and they literally can't believe it. Within 25 minutes, a new idea is implemented.
Wow.
And it happens so fast. That's one of the things that kind of freaks people out about the company we have. We have something called an interruptive culture, and it makes this go fast. See, in most companies, you have, hey, I need a meeting. Okay, well, schedule it with this person, get on my calendar, send out an invite, send it to 5 other people, and then next Thursday, we'll get 15 minutes to have a meeting about whether or not we have a meeting on Tuesday. Oh my gosh, you've got to be kidding me. In our business, it's like literally, I've been in there with the CEO, with the CFO, with the COO, and with general counsel, and my door open, and a brand new employee will walk in and go, hey, I got a question. And if the door is open, it means they can do that. Why? Because whatever question that person has is a question that leads to somebody else, that ultimately leads to the customer that needs to get it done. And if we can get that question answered literally in like 15 seconds, we are going to be a week ahead of our competitors who took a week to get it on the calendar to get it done. And that speed is essential. Now, there are some departments like the developers, you can't do that because for every interruption they have, it takes them 15 minutes to get back into where they were mentally. Yeah. And if we're having a meeting that has financial statements involved and we have to keep our focus, then you can't. But for the most part, we just really encourage this interruptive culture, and it becomes an innovative culture on top of that.
It's so good. It reminds me of the movie Ford versus Ferrari, when Mr. Shelby's sitting there with Mr. Ford, and he goes and he just kind of rehearses the whole process it took just to get the meeting through the secretary and the paperwork and all the different things. And anyways, and he's just like, I just have to have control. You have to give me some control, otherwise we're never going to win this race. Is the sense of it. So true. Okay, I always like to ask the guests, tell us a time when you rejected passivity, that inner passivity that men have at times, to shrink back versus doing what's absolutely best, even under extraordinary circumstances, that was meaningful, a signature part of your journey.
Well, most recently, I mean, my life changed a lot in the past few years. I went from having younger kids at home to them all being adults and out of the house. I sold a big portion of my company and led it through COVID, but then I promoted a CEO. And when you go from CEO to executive chairman, it's like going from dad to grandpa. I mean, you kiss some babies, but you're not changing any diapers. And when they cry, you hand them back over. So it's not even close to the same role. And my wife was killed. That's part of my story. So I go into this mode here where all of a sudden I am not a CEO. I don't have kids at home, and I'm single. And I don't need to work. I'm doing fine financially, so there's no need for me to grind at all. And I was tired. I was tired. I mean, any one of those things independently is a little bit challenging. When the kids leave the house, that's a big change when you've had 6 kids around. When you are the CEO and you're really, really pushing to get to that exit, and then you have that exit and a big windfall that comes with the exit, and then you promote somebody to CEO and you don't have that daily phone call that comes in. Not to mention the fact that when you're a CEO, there's a certain status thing about it, and everybody wants your take on everything. And so it gets a lot quieter. And then, being single was a bit of a shock to the system. And so it was a very alone thing. I mean, my house was very, very quiet. But I remember waking up and saying, I need to do something here. And being too hard, it was too hard. And it was never like that in my life. I was always able to say, well, I'm just going to do something. But I didn't have to. There wasn't a consequence to not doing something. My bills were paid. I could go wherever I wanted to, whenever I wanted to, at any time that I wanted to, and have whatever fun I wanted to. And I started to just say, I need time. I need to relax. And I actually did. I do feel like there was a period of time because of all the simultaneous trauma of so many different things at one point, let alone the world was just crazy in COVID. And I remember saying, I got to start a new business, or I got to write a new book, and trying to get myself excited about it, and then just going, I can't. And then ultimately speaking, really what it was God restored me. I asked him to. I kept asking him to give me more strength. But then it was a reflection upon the parable of the talents, and knowing that I wanted to hear, well done, good and faithful servant, that I have way too many talents to bury them, and that I didn't want to bury them. And so I started creating obligations. I started creating deadlines. I got a book proposal out there and signed a contract with a good publisher, Ben Bella. And there are a couple of companies bidding on it. And once I got that and I knew it was signed, I had a deadline. And once I had the deadline, I said, well, I got to do this the right way. And so I can't let these people down. I've got to make this thing is a bestseller. So how do I make sure it's a bestseller? Well, I'm going to have to tie this to it and that to it. Well, I can tie a business to that. And all of a sudden now I've found myself just lit with enthusiasm on new ideas and projects, and feeling wealthy because I have new people in my life, like Nico, my producer, the rest of the people in my company. And I'm getting married in a short period of time. My fiance is absolutely amazing. And frankly speaking, if I was just some bum sitting around not doing much, not building businesses, I don't think she'd have been that attracted to me. She's ever upset, all I have to do is start talking business, and she thinks that's pretty awesome. She gets turned on by it. I like that.
Well, congrats. That's big news, and I'm happy for you.
Thank you.
And I know it's probably not easy. Knowing you, it's not easy for you to relax for long periods of time, is my guess. So that's probably was really good for you.
It was. And the very fact that I am productive and that I am busy and that I knew that my mind and body were kind of rejecting, at least temporarily, and that I could do it. I could. I mean, I was in a place where I could. There were times where I was almost as tired when I was younger, but I had obligations. So I didn't have time. I just had to get up and accept the responsibility. And that was good. But at this point, it was a little bit different, and I'm now in that patriarchal state of life, so it's a different time.
So good, so good. This has been just an incredible conversation. It's going to help so many people. What would you like to share with people to send them to what you're up to?
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Leading Giants is the website. They can also go to, if they just search Dave Durand on YouTube, we've got a lot of great guests. Really what I'm helping people do is, when I say become a giant, I literally mean it. I mean that if you want to do great things in life, the greatest people in life are extreme. Some people are offended by the idea of be extreme. Well, name anybody in history who you admire who wasn't extreme. Jesus was absolutely extreme. Yeah. If you have not seen a crucifix, you may not know how extreme he is. But if you've seen one, you can see how extreme he was. But every other great figure in life. I mean, the reason that people will always remember Winston Churchill and not Neville Chamberlain is because Neville was not extreme. He was extremely vanilla. And that doesn't win wars. And all of the greatest figures. That doesn't mean that you don't have to be tame and have temperament, and to tame your temperament and to be reasonable around people. Extreme doesn't mean irritating. It doesn't mean loud. It doesn't mean all these things. It just means, like, I'm going to be committed. It's fascinating, Isaac. We all want everybody else to be like that. We want everybody in our life to be an expert. You're going to go get LASIK surgery. You any good at this, doc? I'm okay. You don't want that one. You don't want your accountant to say, numbers were never really my thing. Just decided to be an accountant anyway. We want our Uber driver to be an expert. We want our teachers who teach our kids to be experts. And that basically means to be extreme about greatness. And those things require having your whole life together in so many different ways and seeing things for their highest value to become magnanimous in life. And so that's really what I want to help teach people. But at the end of the day, if you want to know how to build a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars and sell it and lead at a big level and enjoy life with a couple of fun cars, I can show you that too, but just not at the cost to your soul.
That's so good, so good. So everybody, leadinggiants.com. Well, hey, thanks so much for being on the show. I was so looking forward to this, and you absolutely delivered, and it's great to see you.
Thanks so much, Isaac.